Thank you very much. Do you know why there are so few people over there and so many here? Because they keep having abortions. Many of you have heard me speak about the Roe versus Wade decision in terms of the horror it has caused. Although I'm a faithful Catholic, I usually talk in groups about things that are not really religious-based because I'm trying to reach all people. And I realize abortion is not just an issue for Catholics or Christians, but an issue for all people of any religion and people with no religion at all. It's a human issue. As I've explained before, the Roe versus Wade decision has resulted in more deaths than any single decision in human history. As I mentioned before, World War II would have had to be fought for over 600 years to kill as many Americans as have died since Roe versus Wade. And the Iraq War, at its bloodiest, would have to continue for 50,000 years in order for that to happen. But I'm going to break with my tradition and talk today about faith. I'm going to talk from the standpoint of my faith. Many of you have found difficulty in trying to raise decent children to be different than that, in a society that doesn't really ascribe to Christian principles. My grandmother used to say, when your kids are born, you love them so much you could eat them up, but when they become teenagers, you wish you had. We know that it's very difficult to instill faith and morals. 76% of Americans identify themselves as Christian. About 23% identify themselves as Catholic. And often during rather heated debates on whether our children could do something, do this or that, or some other thing that all of their friends were doing, we used to tell the kids, my wife Anjali and I, we've got 82 years of experience and you've got 12, so don't argue with us. Well, Samuel Clemens, better known as Mark Twain, noted that when he was 15, his parents were the stupidest people on earth, and it's amazing how much they learned by the time he turned 21. So when it's convenient for us, we use the wisdom of the world, the wisdom of our years, to tell our children that they shouldn't do certain things. Yet something happens to many of us as we get older. We become enlightened. We begin to think that we know everything because we've lived a certain number of years or because we've got university degrees. Many people continue to claim that they're Christian as they adopt the ways of the world and more enlightened than their parents, their church, and their grandparents in history. They hold perverted values, pro-choice, that the politicians tell them that they should do because they don't want to seem that they're not understanding and loving. These perverted values have seeped into our schools and even our religious institutions. In many cases, religious institutions and religious schools, instead of teaching faith and decency, teach these values to our children. In my own church, sometimes the euphemisms of peace and justice supplant those of faith and morals. Ask any 5-year-old child if it's ever okay to kill a baby in his mother's womb, and he'll recoil with anguish. But if you ask that same child 10 years after they get the public school system at them and manipulating their values, they'll think it's perfectly okay. What makes so many Christians think they have the right to claim greater wisdom than their children, but at the same time believe that they have greater wisdom than 2,000 years of tradition? What does the wisdom of faith tell us? Psalm 139 says, "For thou didst form my inward parts, thou didst weave me in my mother's womb, not room. Jeremiah 1:5 states, "Before I formed you in the womb," not the bedroom, the womb, "I knew you, and before you were born, I consecrated you." It is a contradiction to believe that one can claim wisdom because of 20 or 30 more years of living and because one has attained a degree and refute the wisdom of 2,000 years. Yet many of us obstinately refuse to abide by the teachings of our faith, thinking ourselves enlightened when we're really in the dark, like those people are. I was very proud that my son... I'm going fast so I can finish all this, or I get in trouble. My son Andrew, I'm very proud that he recently wrote a wonderful paper on the evils of moral relativism and its effect on faith and morals. The Roe versus Wade decision and the deaths of 50 million babies shows us that the wisdom of man is horribly flawed. It is precisely because of convoluted thinking like this that our country now perches on the abyss. In order to gain power, our politicians attacked and undermined the Bible and religion, and now they are doing the same to our Constitution. With each passing moment, we move closer to the death of our once great nation because we've traded faith and true wisdom for licentiousness, moral relativism, and the culture of death. Romans 6:23 tells us, for the wages of sin is death. This is true not only of individuals, but also of nations. The sinful Roe versus Wade decision was not only cause of death of 51 million babies, but the beginning of the death of our nation as well. Being a person of faith gives me great joy, but it also must give me humility. I am not the final arbiter of right and wrong. I must look to sources of greater wisdom than myself with the humility to accept the truth. Yes, God gives us free will. We can turn away from the good, and we can be popular and exalted among people like those across the street to the detriment of our souls and of our country. Or we can use that free will to come closer to God and in the process save our country. The Gospel of Luke tells us that to whom much is given, much will be required. There is no excuse for anyone who considers himself or herself to be Christian, or a faithful Jew, or a faithful Muslim to be pro-choice. Abortion is murder, and no one can be pro-murder. I want to say a few words specifically to my fellow Catholics. Those who have misinterpreted Catholic teaching on conscience will surely find that pride is the first deadly sin. The Catechism tells us that formal cooperation in an abortion constitutes a grave offense and incurs late sententiae excommunication. You cannot be Catholic and also be pro-choice, despite what Nancy Pelosi thinks. I also ask my fellow physicians to examine their consciences. Performing abortions and assisting in suicides is not practicing medicine, it is committing murder. We don't want to condemn the women who have been tricked into abortions, but we want to tell the people who take the $200 that they're doing the wrong thing. Tomorrow, we celebrate a great American, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Let us remember that he was always faithful and pro-life, that Planned Parenthood was founded on racism, and that abortion is an attempt at genocide. Dr. King once said, "The hottest place in hell is reserved for those who remain neutral in times of great moral conflict." In closing, let us not lose hope. As the bishop stated, a recent poll showed that over 50% of Americans are now pro-life. Look at our crowd and look at their crowd. Let us all strive to renew our faith in God and our commitment to this struggle. Let everyone know that we will no longer stand for the passage of laws that force us to pay taxes that will be used for abortion. Let us work together with faith and love to vote the pro-abortion politicians out of office and take back this nation for God and our children. We must commit ourselves to ending the horror of abortion forever, so help us God. Thank you.